Okay, ayusin ko lang yung lighting guys kasi medyo may imbalance tayo sa lighting dito. Pasensya na. Okay. Alright. No pressure. No pressure. Kailangan din natin ng kape. Okay. Ganito. I'm trying to also record this guys dito sa camera dito para may high resolution din tayo dito. So pasensya na if I'm not gonna look exactly directly at you guys, but obviously I'm gonna check your comments. I'm looking at your comments and all of that. Pag-usapan natin guys, okay? Huwag kayong magulo. So kahapon, what we discussed was the possibility of a grand coalition between the genuine opposition and essentially the administration ticket. And it was a very contentious discussion with former Senator Antonio Trillanes, who's no longer running at the national level. So yung mga nagsasabi na they hope that Trillanes runs for Senate among others. Final na po yan, decided na siya na he will run for LGU, local government unit, because he feels that this is the way forward for the opposition. They also have to have footprint on the ground. And perhaps the Vico Soto model, and to a certain degree, also the Isko Moreno model could be replicated by other opposition or progressive leaders like Senator Trillanes. Now, the context of the conversation, at medyo uminit ang conversation, and I want to also say my own 2 cents on this issue, is that Senator Trillanes has been pushing for essentially some of the genuine opposition candidates, katulad ni Bam Aquino, katulad ni Kiko Pangilinan, not so much with Chel Jokno, because I think Chel Jokno's position is very clear, human rights lawyer. There's just no way that you can see him having any kind of interface with the Marcos administration. So no, but at least with the 2 other candidates of the genuine opposition, Senator Trillanes is hoping na baka pwede sila mag-guest candidate. Now, that proposal was emphatically rejected by Leni Robredo. Leni Robredo essentially came out and said that if anything like that happens, it will be the betrayal of the core convictions of the opposition. Senator Rizzo Ontiveros, who's now the de facto leader of the opposition and taking charge of essentially this ticket, the Bam Aquino, Kiko Pangilinan, and Chel Jokno ticket, also rejected the proposal but sounded much more nuanced, if not conditional. I think very clear naman, both Leni and Risa, na the historical issues with the Marcoses is just too profound for us to just ignore and look at political exigencies ahead of next year's elections. So that's one side of the argument. Ang stance naman ni Trillanes is very simple. And that's why I quoted Lord Toranaga from Shogun. When you win, everything is possible. Essentially, the first rule in politics is to make sure viable candidate ka for an office. Because if you're not a viable candidate for office, I'm not sure what you're trying to do there, right? If you're trying to just make a point, gusto mo magpapogi lang, gusto mo mamarkahan ka lang, well, good for you. But at the end of the day, you run for office if you really believe you have a good chance of winning, and more importantly, you got the right set of policies and convictions once you're in office. At ang point ni Senator Trillanes is that the opposition has to really look at the facts on the ground. And the facts on the ground is 3 election na kung saan sobrang talong-talo na itong genuine opposition. Leni Robredo in 2016 and Rizzo Ontiveros in 2022 were kind of the exceptions, but nevertheless, across the board, sobrang grabe yung mga reversals, electoral reversals ng opposition. In 2019, for the first time in 81 years, wala man lang isang kandidato ng opposition ay nakapasok dun sa Senate, for instance. So, in every sense of the word, it has been an electoral catastrophe. Now, if you look at, of course, you also look at the preferences of people. Dun sa Octo survey, for instance, if you look at it. And let me be very clear. We cannot base our analysis on, I don't know, haka lang or kwentong barbero lang. Alright? We cannot base it based on some chismis lang sa Viber or anong sinabi ng Titas of Manila. We cannot base it on some sort of mumbo-jumbo, I don't know, Google Analytics, whatever. Alright? Surveys are the best we got. Surveys are not perfect. Yes, surveys could be manipulated, but not all surveys are the same. Some surveys are more reputable than others. And let me be absolutely clear, inis na inis ako dun sa iba na parating dismissive kaagad sa surveys and questioning the integrity of the survey agencies. 2 of my former colleagues, alright, are leading 2 of the surveys that I tend to always cite. In fact, 3 of my colleagues. My colleague at the Philippine Daily Inquirer, si Dr. Mangahas, who leads SWS. Si Dr. Holmes naman, my colleague, former colleague at LaSalle, who hosts Pulse Asia. And of course, my former professor and good friend, si Professor Ranjit Rai, who leads Okta. All right, these are the three that I tend to cite because these are the organizations that I know and I can vouch for the integrity of people who are leading them. Now, kung feeling mo mas magaling ka, kung feeling mo you have something more credible than that, you have better surveys or better analytics, please go ahead. But last time I checked, no one could provide something more credible to me. So, for the purpose of analytic discussion, hindi chismisan, hindi yung self-serving ideological bloviating nonsense, blabbering. No, for the sake of proper analytic discourse, tingnan natin yung mga most authoritative surveys na meron tayo. And ayan ko yung ugali ng iba dyan na sa site lang nila yung Pulse Asia pag gusto na nila yung resulta. For instance, nung bumaba na yung approval rating ni BBM or pabaksak yung approval rating sabihin natin ni Sara, biglang gusto na nila i-cite yung Pulse Asia. Hindi pwede yan. Alright? Or kung biglang pinakita ng Pulse Asia na sobrang konting Pilipina ay supportive dun sa charter change, biglang isa-cite nila yung Pulse Asia. That's disingenuous. If you really believe, genuinely believe, and you have an evidence that these surveys are cooked, right? Lutong Macau, then don't go there and selectively cite them. But to begin with, I rather believe the Ronald Holmes of this world. I rather believe the Mangahas of this world, who are my colleagues, and I can vouch for their integrity, who are professors, who have PhDs, who know their stuff, who have graduated from top university, than some mumbo-jumbo people out there. Okay, just to be clear about that. So, if you look at the surveys, and unfortunately, the only survey we have along these lines is from only Okta, and Okta is good. It's also by my colleagues in UP and my former professor. I hope that other agencies also provide that so that you can triangulate it. Now, if you look at that, 31% of Filipinos are Team BBM or Loyalista. Only 20% or so are DDS hardcore. Essentially, us versus the world. So, small plurality lang talaga yung core base ng mga Dutertes. That leaves you around 50% or 49% rather, who are not with either BBM or not with Duterte. Except, dun sa almost 50% na yan, kakapiraso lang ay nagsabi na they still believe in the genuine opposition. 4%, 5%, 6%, with margin of error, barely 2-3%. So you have 44 to 47% of Filipinos saying, either wala na silang pake sa politika, or wala na silang belief sa opposition, or a combination of two. Eh, itong mga tipo na mag-migrate na lang tayo, wala na tayong pake sa mundo. Alright? Wala na pag-asa ang Pilipinas. Alright? So, when you have a situation like this, in my opinion, you needed two things. First of all, a proper postmortem kung saan pag-aralan mo where on earth did the opposition go wrong in not one, not two, but three different elections. From 2016 all the way to 2022. Alright? Again, in spite of, Leni Robredo managing to eke it out by a small margin in 2016 against BBM, and also Riza making it at least to top 12 in the 2022 senatorial elections. But across the board, it has been an electoral disaster for the opposition. So you have to wonder what on earth is going on. And yun ang parati kong frustration, na there was never a proper post-mortem. Now, I see movies being made about the pink movement. I see documentaries being made. I see, books being written. That's great. That's fantastic. I'm all for celebration of what the pink movement represented, at least the aspirations of the pink movement. Nevertheless, for me, that is not political analysis. In fact, I have not seen a single creative production on the pink movement consulting a single real political scientist or legit political analyst. None. Zero. Zilch. Right? So I see a bunch of creative people who know how to make a nice documentary, nice tarpaulin, nice emotional thing, coming up with their own version of political reality. Again, the intention is great. I welcome that because I think we have to constantly be reminded of what is achievable in the context of the Philippines, meaning millions of middle-class Filipinos coming out and out of their own pocket contributing to a movement for change, aspiring for a better Philippines. Okay yan, maganda yan. Pero ang kulang parati sa akin, guys, is wala talagang legit na political analysis. And please, no offense to some of my colleagues in media, but this whole, disinformation lang yan, disinformation lang yan, disinformation lang yan, or denian lang yan, I'm sorry, that doesn't cut it for me. All right? Because if you want to talk about disinformation, things are as bad in Brazil. Things are as bad in South Africa. Things are as bad in India. Things are as bad in Indonesia. Even worse, in Latin American countries sa mga others, kung saan nananalo pa rin yung opposition. In fact, hindi lang nananalo yung center-left opposition, liberal-left, nananalo pa yung far-left opposition in many cases. So if you want to just use the disinformation as a basis to explain everything, immediately, you run into two problems. One is, there are other examples whereby same level of problems or similar problems, and yet the opposition does better. But the second, and even more nefarious concern I have is, if you say it's all disinformation, or it's 70% disinformation, you're essentially blaming the voters. You're blaming the voters. And let's be honest, the implication is extremely elitist. In effect, you're gaslighting the voters. Again, I didn't vote for BBM, I didn't vote for Digong. Absolutely not. But, you have to also understand bakit nawala ng pag-asa ng mga tao or nawala ng belief ang tao dun sa liberal left opposition. Actually, liberal opposition lang, really. And, look at it. All those years na mga liberal opposition were in power, was there a genuine transformation of Philippine political system? What percentage of Congress was dominated by political dynasty during time ni Pinoy or Corazon Aquino or Ramos, sige pilitin pa natin, or earlier years of Arroyo? Right? 70-80% pa rin. Ano yung poverty rate? Gaano ka significant reduction in poverty rate throughout those years? Yes, things did better during Pinoy. But, nevertheless, if you look at Gini coefficient, if you look at, for instance, distribution of wealth, in 2011, according to World Bank, 40 richest families in the country took home 76% of newly created growth. 40 pamilya lang, nakuha nila more than lampas sa kalahatan ng lahat ng mga new economic value na pinoproduce ng bansa natin noong 2011. And you think that became better over the next few years? No. There was no significant change because the structure of Philippine economy remained the same. Service-oriented, real estate-oriented, BPO-oriented, speculative-oriented, not much of manufacturing, unemployment among the highest in ASEAN region, and poverty and hunger rates also among the worst in the region, right? And then in terms of realities on the ground, yung mga informal sectors, yung mga walang, matinong, kabuhayan or matinong housing, was there a significant improvement? So, you cannot blame voters kung nawala na sila ng belief dun sa traditional liberal sloganeering and all of that. Now, that doesn't mean that, okay, si Duterte. Absolutely not. I think Duterte exploited that grievance. All right? And yes, Marcos has also exploited that grievance to come back. Essentially, sabi ng Marcos is, ang dami nilang pangako sa inyo, umalis kami, nasaan na kayo ngayon? Diba? And then, of course, there was disinformation. Whether it's Digong or BBM and all, marami silang disinformation, given yan. But what you have to ask is this, at yun, dito ako inis na inis, dun sa mga nag-feeling expert, to say that ang tao, ganito, sisisihin mo lang tao dahil naniwala sila sa disinformation, and then, hindi mo i-analyze bakit nga sila naniniwala sa disinformation, that means hindi mo alam pinagsasabi mo. Because again, there are two levels to that. First of all, there was a survey done, and Vox, for instance, published that 2 years ago, which showed that actually karamihan sa mga tao na pro-BBM noong 2022, aminado naman sila na hindi naman sila naniniwala talaga dun sa mga Taliano gold, yung mga ganyan-ganyan. Alam din nila fake news yan eh. Pero sa sobrang inis nila sa kabila at yung elitism ng kabila, dito pa rin sila. So there was an element of almost just grievance and puerile backlash. All right? To be honest about it. And also, let's just try something new. We're sick and tired of going back to the old thing. Right? So there's that element of that. But yung pangalawa, another reason why nagtathrive ang disinformation is because of education system. Ang hina nung pundasyon ng ating education system. Critical thinking, critical understanding of history, sobrang missing. That's a fact. That has been a fact for a long time. Pero ano yung ginawa ng opposition, anong ginawa ng mga reformists and liberals to fix this problem all those years? What? So, yun ang point ko eh. Yes, disinformation is an issue. Yes, may dayaan sa elections. In fact, ang mas malaking concern sa akin sa dayaan ay vote buying. Pero vote buying works because walang poverty alleviation. Because ang dami sa ating mga probinsya, right, ay hawak pa rin ng mga warlords and dynasties. So, if our people are cynical, if our people are attracted to shortcuts, quote-unquote, shortcuts after 30 years of waiting is understandable, right? Kasi sa sobrang desperate mo, kasi walang significant change. Bawat araw, libo-libong Pilipino ay umalis ng bansa, pumupunta kung saan-saan para lang makahanap ng matinong kabuhayan. Right? Or at least some sort of a wage that enables them to sustain their people. Right? So you have to ask yourself the question, bakit maniwala pang tao sa mga paulit-ulit na pangako ng EDSA this, EDSA that, and then wala namang ginawa sa oligarchs, wala namang ginawa sa corruption, nothing significant. Wala naman ginawang significantly about industrial policy, about creating inclusive development. In fact, even if you bring corruption down, if you don't create an economy that is dynamic, that creates job, wala pa rin eh. You still cannot catch up with the realities on the ground. All right? So, that's just the first level. All right? That's just the first level, which is walang postmortem kung saan talagang magkakaroon ng solid, robust, realistic analysis na bakit nawalan ng pag-asa ng taong bayan. Bakit the same voters, the same Filipinos who voted Pinoy into power, the same Filipinos that voted Vico Soto into power, that voted Leni into power, they lost in general faith in traditional liberal politics.